Let's look at how to do the basic calculations of reacting masses. There are a few important habits to build when we do these calculations. And well, the first, understand the question, read the question. Second, the equation. We must have the equation down just to visualize what is actually reacting with what is the product, and that the equation must be balanced, because this balancing tells us the ratio, this relative proportion of reactants and products and how they react. It's really important. Then from the analysis of the question, we understand what equation we will need to use. For example, this one, it's the mass of oxygen. You can even rearrange a bit the words in and make it a bit more visual if you need. For example, well, I need to find the mass of oxygen. So I'm just going to write it like this because it gives me a bit more clarity of what is that I need to find. That react with 12 grams of magnesium. Okay, so I know that I have 12 grams of magnesium. If I have the mass, the equation that I need to use, and that's the first thing you will need to write down the equation that you will need to use. And I think triangle is always a good idea to have it because you will constantly need to rearrange this equation. So we know that the mass is calculated, mass or the moles is calculated as the mass divided by the MR. Okay. Then the steps that you always must have in your mind when you have any type of calculation with reacting masses, could be reacting volumes, could be concentration, is moles, ratio, moles. This will give us a start of pretty much any type of a calculation. Okay, the first thing to think about is moles. So what is the first step? What can we find the moles of? Well, we only have the mass of magnesium. So according to our equation, moles is equal to mass over MR. That's something that we need. So we may want, before we start the calculation, we may want to look in the periodic table and find the MR of the things that we will need to find. For example, I have the mass of magnesium, so I know that I will be able to find the moles of magnesium if I have the MR. And I will look at that in the periodic table, and that is equal to 24. The MR is always the biggest number in the periodic table. And yes, we don't include that big 2. Forget about it, that only it's involved with the ratio. Those 2 are everything we need to find the moles of magnesium, because at the end you can only find the moles of whatever you have the mass of. First step, moles, great. I need to find the moles of magnesium. Very important, be tidy, write labels and unit of what you're finding, because like this you give a meaning to every number. So moles of magnesium is equal to 12 grams divided by 24. So mass over MR is equal to the moles. And that gives us 0.5 moles. Great. First step, it's done. Ratio. The ratio compares these relative quantities of whatever we are considering. In this case, we have the mass of oxygen that react with the mass of magnesium. So the ratio, we will compare, and I always suggest to write a little table to do this comparison between magnesium and oxygen. And we know that by looking at the question. So magnesium, as you can see, it has a big 2 in front, and oxygen doesn't have any number. This tells us that their ratio, so the relative proportions, is a 2:1. With the ratio, which is this, the big numbers, so this stoichiometric coefficient, we can then find the moles of the other species in the reaction. In fact, we want to find the moles of oxygen. Oh, that was my speaker. The moles of oxygen, right? Because that's what we need to find the mass of. So we need the moles because mass is moles times MR. So the moles, we have the magnesium, 0.5, because we just calculated it. What is the moles of oxygen? Well, it follows that same change. So 2:1, we divide this by 2. So we would apply the same change. So the moles of oxygen would be 0.25. Why do we need that? Because if we look back at the question, this Third step, it's done. We need to find the mass of oxygen. So the mass of oxygen, it's moles times mR. So let's do that. Mass of oxygen will be equal to the moles. We now have it. It's 0.25 times the mR. Do we have it? Yes, we can look at the periodic table. It's a 16, but we have two oxygens because it's O2. So the molecule, it contains two oxygens, so it would be 32. So 0.25 times 32, it would give us and I'm doing the calculator, it would give us our mass. So it's 8 grams. Notice, equation that we need. The 3 steps that we always need to follow. We can rearrange the information to make it a bit more visual, like next to the compounds and the elements in the equation. The table to do ratio and moles, it's really useful because this is all nice and organized. And very important, labels and units, because if we look back at this, we know the meaning of every number. 0.5 is the moles of magnesium because we wrote that. So it's really important that you make everything nice and tidy so that if you look back at it, you know exactly what each of the number mean. Okay, then find your own way to organize the information. You may not need to write the equation down, but I would suggest you to do it always, because at least you have something visual always to direct your attention while you try to solve the equation. Okay, so I hope this helped. So if you're struggling with these exercises and you really need a guide, let's use this one, just because sometimes we have a lot of words, we have so many numbers that we need some just steps to follow. So make sure you have them down with you, and then whenever you do this exercise, you look at the steps until at one point you will realize that, oh, I know these steps, it's my habit now. So you won't need to keep writing them down. So when we have this type of mass calculation, the first thing we want to do, that we can do if we're a bit confused, it's organize the data. Okay, so what I mean is maybe you want to analyze the numbers you're given and write them down next to the equation. The second step we want to do is we want to find the MR of all compounds of interest. What I mean is, okay, get the MR down of the things that we need to calculate. For example, magnesium and oxygen, have it down. Then, okay, we can finally get into the calculations. Well, we can actually write the equation and the steps. What I mean is that we can write the steps, mole ratio moles, because we need to get it in our mind and have it down. And the equation, mass moles MR. Let's have that down on the paper too. 4, finally, we can do the calculation. Get calculate. So we use these moles ratio moles, yeah, to do all of these calculation, okay? And then we can find the mass again. But it's really important, these are kind of exercise, okay? I will save this, share it, and I think it's something important to follow until you just will do this all as a habit. Just a few extra things that I want you to always pay attention to when you do this exercise. Write down the units, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Write down the labels of everything. What I mean, write down, I'm calculating the moles of magnesium, write that down. Units, so that you know what that number is and you're never confused, okay? Then make sure you read the question a million times. After every step you've taken, maybe go back and read the question one more time to make sure that, oh yeah, I know exactly where I'm getting at. I'm getting to the mass of magnesium or to the mass of oxygen. So you keep in mind what is that you need to find. Okay?
Yeah.
So very important to keep these steps up. Okay? And maybe now I'll give you one exercise to do. So why don't you try this and let me know your result. Let me know how all these steps went, if they helped or not.